The king's guard gives the tourist the big elbow. Now, at 24, she had finally arrived. Her plane had touched down early in the morning, and the crisp spring air of London greeted her as she stepped out of the airport. The city smelled of fresh rain and flowers blooming along the streets, and the soft murmur of people hurrying to work added a unique rhythm that she found oddly comforting. She felt alive, as if every moment of her life had been leading up to this one. Emma had planned her visit carefully. She wanted to see everything: the Tower of London, Westminster Abbey, Big Ben, and most importantly, Buckingham Palace. For months, she had saved money, researched the best times to visit, and read dozens of travel blogs to ensure she didn't miss a single detail. Today, she would witness the changing of the guard, a ceremony she had always seen only in photographs. She imagined the guards in their tall bearskin hats, standing perfectly still, and the crisp precision of the marching band as it filled the palace grounds with music. The thought made her heart race with excitement. As she approached the palace, Emma noticed that the streets were already bustling with tourists from around the world. She could hear French, Spanish, German, and Italian being spoken around her. Some families were laughing, children waving flags and skipping ahead, while others quietly admired the architecture. Emma felt a sense of camaraderie with these strangers, all of them sharing the same goal: to catch a glimpse of history and witness the royal tradition firsthand. The palace loomed ahead, its stone walls golden under the morning sun, flags fluttering gently atop its towers. Emma's breath caught in her throat. It was more magnificent than she had imagined. She joined the crowd lining the palace's black iron railings. People were jostling slightly, adjusting their positions, trying to get the perfect angle for their cameras or phones. Emma, tall and eager, managed to find a spot near the front. She carefully placed her bag on the ground, adjusting her scarf against the cool breeze. Around her, children were being lifted by their parents, grandparents were pointing out details of the palace, and tourists whispered to each other excitedly, sharing facts they had learned in guidebooks. Emma smiled, feeling part of something bigger than herself. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation. Every few minutes, someone would point toward the gate, and the crowd would murmur excitedly, scanning the distance for the first glimpse of the guards. Emma, feeling the thrill of the moment, raised her camera and practiced her shots, adjusting the lens to capture the grandeur before her. Her fingers trembled slightly, not from cold, but from the sheer excitement. She had imagined this moment so many times, and now it was finally happening. The distant sound of drums began to rise above the chatter, and a ripple of movement spread through the crowd. People straightened, craning their necks, their eyes bright with expectation. As the guards appeared in the courtyard, Emma felt a shiver of awe. They were even more impressive in person than in photographs. Dressed in their traditional red tunics and towering bearskin hats, they moved with impeccable precision. Every step, every turn, every gesture was executed with discipline and grace. The crowd fell into a hushed admiration, watching the soldiers as they prepared for the ceremonial march. Emma was captivated. She felt as if time had slowed, as if she were watching history unfold in real time. Every detail, the gleam of the buttons on the uniforms, the careful alignment of their boots, the sharpness of their expressions, seemed designed to impress and inspire. Emma tried to position herself perfectly to capture the entire scene. She leaned slightly forward, eager to get the best shot, forgetting momentarily the invisible boundary that separated the public from the palace grounds. She was so absorbed in the moment, adjusting the focus on her camera, checking the angle, that she didn't notice a man behind her gently nudging her back. The crowd was shifting, jostling, and Emma's enthusiasm made her oblivious to the subtle signs that she was encroaching too far. Around her, other tourists were equally absorbed. Cameras clicked incessantly, smartphones hovered in the air, and a few parents whispered reminders to their children to stand still. Emma's mind raced as she imagined how perfect her photos would be, capturing not only the soldiers, but also the historical essence of Buckingham Palace. She could already see herself showing the pictures to her friends back home, recounting every detail of the ceremony, the crisp marching, and the solemn stance of the king's guard. The wind picked up slightly, rustling the flags atop the palace, and Emma shivered, though not from cold. She felt the electric excitement of being part of a moment that had been repeated for centuries, yet never exactly the same. The guards began their coordinated march across the courtyard, and Emma instinctively stepped a little closer, trying to frame them perfectly in her viewfinder. She didn't realize how small her movements were in the grand scale of the palace grounds, but to those responsible for maintaining order, even the smallest misstep mattered. Every sense in Emma's body was alive. She heard the crisp steps of the guards, the steady beat of the drums, the occasional murmur from the crowd, and even the faint rustle of the palace banners. She smelled the faint metallic tang of the palace gates and the fresh spring air carrying the aroma of nearby gardens. She felt the vibrations of the drums through her feet and the gentle press of the crowd behind her. Every detail combined to make the moment unforgettable. Emma's thoughts wandered briefly to the stories she had read about tourists meeting the guards. Most accounts were of respectful interactions, but a few mentioned minor scuffles with overly enthusiastic visitors. Emma smiled to herself, confident she would avoid such mishaps. She had always been careful and courteous, and she liked to think of herself as someone who followed the rules. Yet, in her excitement, she didn't notice how dangerously close she was to crossing an invisible line, a line that would soon become very real. As she raised her camera for the perfect shot, a soldier stationed nearby observed the crowd. Emma didn't see him yet, but Sergeant Thompson's eyes were trained on every movement, aware of every visitor who strayed too far. He had spent years standing at Buckingham Palace, maintaining the dignity of the ceremony, ensuring that every tourist remained safe while respecting the traditions of the monarchy. He knew that many visitors meant no harm, but even a small intrusion could disrupt the order of the event. Emma adjusted her focus one last time, smiling as she imagined the perfect photograph she would take. She had finally arrived at Buckingham Palace, and nothing could ruin this moment. The guards marched steadily, their precision flawless, and the crowd watched in awe. Emma's heart swelled with excitement and admiration, unaware that her enthusiasm had brought her just a step too close to the boundary, a step that would soon trigger an unexpected, unforgettable encounter. At that moment, Emma felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned slightly, startled but still focused on her camera. It wasn't a push or shove, just a gentle, measured contact. She froze, confused, and glanced behind her. That's when she saw him, a towering figure in a crisp red uniform, his bearskin hat almost brushing the clouds. His expression was unreadable, his posture perfect, and his presence commanding. Emma's excitement mixed with surprise, and she suddenly realized that the invisible rules she had been unaware of were, in fact, very real. Sergeant Thompson had been standing at Buckingham Palace for 3 years. Every day, from the moment he stepped onto the grounds, he became more than a man. He became a symbol of tradition, discipline, and precision. His uniform, immaculate and stiff, reflected the countless hours of preparation and training that had shaped him into the soldier he was today. The bearskin hat atop his head made him appear taller than he actually was, casting a shadow over the marble courtyard as if he were part of the architecture itself. He had learned, over countless ceremonies, to watch every movement around him. Tourists were unpredictable. Some were curious and careful, moving with respect and excitement. Others, often unintentionally, crossed boundaries, leaning too far or stepping onto forbidden ground. Thompson had learned to read these subtle cues, to sense when someone's enthusiasm might lead to a disruption. It wasn't just about enforcing rules. It was about protecting both the visitors and the solemnity of the ceremony. Today, the crowd was larger than usual. Spring holidays brought families, students, and travelers from all corners of the globe. Thompson's eyes scanned each face, noting the expressions, gestures, and body language. Some tourists chatted quietly, others clicked their cameras incessantly, and a few children bounced excitedly on their parents' feet. Each person carried a story, a reason for being there, yet all were united by curiosity and admiration for the history around them. As the guards moved in precise formation, Thompson's gaze fell on a young woman near the front of the crowd. She seemed entirely absorbed in her camera, adjusting angles and focusing intently on the guards. Thompson noticed the subtle lean forward, the tiny step closer toward the boundary, the way she seemed oblivious to the subtle nudges from people around her. Experience told him that this was the point where intervention might be necessary. He had been in countless situations like this, but each one was different. The unpredictability of human behavior kept him alert. He remembered a tourist last year who had leaned too far over the railing, almost losing balance. A quick adjustment had prevented a potentially embarrassing incident. Thompson knew that being firm yet composed was essential. Any sudden movement could startle the person or cause a ripple through the crowd, disrupting the ceremony. Thompson's mind was calm, though his senses were sharp. He noted the rhythm of the band, the steps of the other guards, and the shifting positions of the tourists. He had to maintain his posture, remain professional, and act only when necessary. The young woman's camera click caught his attention again. She leaned slightly further, her excitement evident in her posture. That tiny shift, almost imperceptible to those around her, was enough for Thompson to prepare for action. In the distance, the palace flags fluttered gently in the breeze. The courtyard was bathed in sunlight, and the stone walls gleamed softly. Tourists pointed and whispered, children tugged at their parents' hands, and somewhere behind the crowd, a guide explained the history of Buckingham Palace. Thompson remained still, blending into the ceremony, yet fully aware of every movement. He understood the importance of presence. To him, being seen as a calm, immovable figure was just as crucial as the action he might take. Time seemed to stretch. The drums of the band created a rhythm that resonated across the courtyard. Thompson felt the vibrations through his boots, grounding him, reminding him of the ceremony's long-standing tradition. Every step of the guards, every turn, every precise movement was part of a story that had been told for centuries. He was a part of that story, as were the thousands of tourists who had come to witness it. The young woman, Emma, adjusted her camera again, her focus entirely on the guards. Thompson observed her breathing, her small movements, and the way she shifted her weight. It was subtle, but it signaled an approach too close to the line she shouldn't cross. Thompson's training kicked in. He knew how to redirect a tourist without causing alarm or injury. Years of experience had taught him to make contact firm but controlled, precise yet gentle, commanding attention without creating fear. He waited for the exact moment, his posture unbroken, his expression neutral. The crowd was alive with anticipation, many oblivious to the tiny drama unfolding at the front. The sound of clicks from cameras and smartphones mixed with the ceremonial music, creating a symphony of modern curiosity against centuries-old tradition. Thompson had learned to observe without distraction. It wasn't enough to act quickly. He had to act correctly, maintaining the dignity of the ceremony while ensuring safety. Thompson's mind briefly wandered to his own training. He had been chosen for the King's Guard after years of military service. Discipline, patience, and attention to detail were not just skills, they were necessities. Each movement, each stance, each interaction with the public had been drilled into him until it became instinct. Today, like every day, he relied on that training. It wasn't about personal pride or ego. It was about respect for history, for the monarchy, and for the countless visitors who came to witness this tradition. He shifted his weight subtly, positioning himself between Emma and the forbidden line. The moment had come. With the precision of someone who had performed this action countless times in rehearsal and in practice, he extended his elbow in a measured, controlled motion. It was not aggressive, nor was it meant to hurt. It was a gentle, firm guidance, enough to redirect her without startling her excessively. His face remained composed, expressionless, revealing nothing of the careful thought behind the action. Emma felt a tap against her side. She stumbled slightly, startled by the sudden, unexpected contact. She turned, confused, her eyes meeting the stoic gaze of the guard. For a moment, the world seemed to pause. She realized she had leaned too far, crossed the invisible boundary, and been corrected in the most formal yet unusual way possible. Around her, other tourists gasped quietly, some stifling laughter, others whispering explanations to their companions. Thompson maintained his position, watching Emma carefully. He knew that the moment could have been awkward, but he also knew that her reaction would determine the next step. She seemed surprised but not upset. Relief washed over him. The intervention had worked as intended. He could resume his stance, returning fully to the ceremony, his presence a calm, commanding figure amid the excitement of the crowd. Emma blinked several times, processing what had just happened. She had never imagined that a simple misstep could lead to such a formal correction. The stoic figure in front of her, clad in red and wearing the iconic bearskin hat, seemed almost like a character from a storybook, immovable, disciplined, and entirely serious. Her initial embarrassment slowly gave way to amusement. She realized she had become part of the very history she had come to admire. Thompson returned to his previous posture, facing forward, immovable, as if nothing had happened. To the crowd, he appeared unchanged, a perfect embodiment of tradition. But in those few seconds, a quiet connection had occurred between soldier and tourist. Emma had learned in the most direct way about the discipline, responsibility, and presence required to be part of the King's Guard. And Thompson had fulfilled his duty, protecting the ceremony and guiding a visitor without breaking the flow of centuries-old tradition. Around them, the palace grounds continued to buzz with excitement. The guards marched on, the band played its music, and tourists continued to capture photographs and videos. Yet, in Emma's mind, the moment lingered. She had witnessed history, yes, but she had also been gently reminded of her place within it. The experience felt personal, memorable, and unexpectedly humorous. The story she would later tell friends and family was already forming in her mind, an encounter with the King's Guard that was equal parts discipline and charm. Thompson's eyes continued to scan the crowd. There were more tourists, more curious observers, each with their own expectations and excitement. He remained vigilant, aware that history repeated itself with each visitor. Discipline, patience, and awareness were his allies. Each action he took, each correction, was a small thread in the vast tapestry of Buckingham Palace tradition. He knew that the grand spectacle depended on countless small, precise actions, an elbow here, a nod there, an unbroken stance across the courtyard. As the ceremony progressed, Thompson reflected briefly on the strange intimacy of his role. He interacted with thousands of visitors, yet rarely spoke. Every gesture, every movement was communication in its own right. A firm tap, a gentle nudge, a guiding hand. These were his words, his means of sharing centuries of history without speaking a single sentence. And today he had communicated perfectly. Emma had understood, even if only for a moment, the weight and responsibility carried by those who stood as symbols of tradition. The changing of the guard continued seamlessly. Tourists cheered softly, took photos, and admired the precision of the soldiers. Emma, now aware of her position, adjusted her camera once again, keeping a respectful distance. She smiled at the thought that the big elbow would become a funny, unforgettable part of her journey. The story of discipline, history, and gentle correction would stay with her forever, a reminder that sometimes the most memorable lessons came in unexpected forms. Emma was completely absorbed in her camera, adjusting the zoom, focusing on the crisp uniforms of the King's Guard, and imagining the perfect shot she would take. Every detail seemed mesmerizing. The polished buttons, the stiffly creased trousers, the shiny boots that glimmered in the sunlight. Her heart raced with excitement, and she felt a connection to history she had only ever read about in books. She was so intent on capturing the scene that she barely noticed how close she was leaning toward the black iron railing, crossing the invisible boundary that separated the crowd from the palace grounds. The crowd around her murmured quietly, shifting as families jostled for a better view. Tourists were snapping pictures, whispering to each other, and pointing toward the ceremonial guards, but Emma's focus was entirely on her goal. She adjusted her camera angle again, leaning just a little further, trying to get both the lead guard and the marching band in a single frame. She had done this countless times in practice at home, setting up perfect shots of statues, fountains, and buildings, but this was different. This was Buckingham Palace, the real thing, and it demanded her full attention. At that moment, Sergeant Thompson noticed her small step forward. His trained eyes observed the lean, the subtle forward weight of her body, and the way she was entirely focused on her camera rather than her surroundings. He had seen this countless times before, tourists unintentionally moving closer to the restricted line because of their excitement. It was never malicious, it was curiosity and eagerness, but the risk was real. A sudden slip, a loss of balance, or an accidental touch of the ceremonial space could disrupt the ceremony or, worse, injure someone. Thompson shifted slightly, preparing himself. His body was tense but controlled. He didn't want to scare her. He wanted to guide her back safely, without drawing attention or causing panic. Years of training in precision and discipline had prepared him for this very moment. He waited for the perfect timing, the exact second when he could intervene with minimal disruption. Emma, oblivious to the tension building just behind her, moved her camera again. She squinted through the lens, focusing on the lead guard, trying to catch the perfect angle of his precise steps. The sun glinted off his boots, and she thought the shot would be worth every effort. She took a tiny step forward, her entire focus on capturing the moment. Her foot brushed slightly against the edge of the pavement, and that was enough for Thompson to act. With the calm precision that had been drilled into him over years, he stepped slightly closer to her. Without any sudden movement or warning, he extended his elbow gently but firmly. The contact was not forceful. It was carefully calculated to stop her forward motion and redirect her attention back behind the line. Emma felt a firm nudge at her side. Startled, she almost lost her balance for a brief moment. Her eyes widened and she turned slowly to see the cause. There he stood, Sergeant Thompson, the King's Guard in full uniform, bearskin hat towering above him, eyes calm and unreadable, posture perfect. His expression revealed nothing, as it always did, yet his presence alone conveyed authority and purpose. Emma blinked, taking in the surreal sight of a soldier using a precise, measured gesture to correct her behavior. She had read about the discipline of the guards, seen countless photos and videos, but experiencing it firsthand was entirely different. For a few seconds, the world seemed to pause around them. The ceremonial music continued, the guards marched on, and tourists snapped pictures all around, but Emma's focus was entirely on the unexpected interaction. She felt a rush of surprise, followed by an odd mix of amusement and embarrassment. Here she was, a tourist, corrected by one of the most disciplined soldiers in the world, and it happened with a gentle but firm big elbow. The people around her noticed the interaction. Some gasped quietly, while others stifled laughter. A few parents explained to their children that the guard was performing his duty, gently teaching her to stay behind the line. Emma felt heat rise to her cheeks, a combination of surprise, embarrassment, and the absurdity of the situation. She wanted to laugh, but she also respected the seriousness of the guard. This was no ordinary person. This was someone trained to maintain centuries of tradition, and his every movement had meaning. Emma adjusted her stance immediately, stepping back behind the line with a sheepish smile. Her camera hung around her neck, momentarily forgotten as she processed the experience. She realized she had been too focused on getting the perfect shot, neglecting the rules that existed for good reason. The big elbow, while startling at first, was a clear and memorable reminder of the importance of boundaries, discipline, and respect. Thompson returned to his original stance, expressionless, unmovable. To the crowd, it appeared as if nothing had happened. The ceremony continued seamlessly, a flawless demonstration of precision and discipline. But for Emma, the moment was unforgettable. She had been gently corrected, guided back to the proper place, and shown firsthand the seriousness with which the king's guard maintained order. She couldn't help but smile at the situation. It was simultaneously humorous and humbling. She had come to Buckingham Palace expecting to capture beautiful photos and experience history, but she had also received a unique lesson in respect and awareness. The guard had communicated more in a single gesture than words could ever convey. Discipline, tradition, and duty, all of it had been expressed in a moment so brief that she almost missed it. Around her, other tourists continued to watch the ceremony, unaware of the small drama that had just unfolded at the front of the crowd. Children laughed, parents explained the significance of the guards, and cameras clicked endlessly. Emma, now positioned safely behind the line, raised her camera again, but this time with a renewed awareness of her surroundings. She framed the perfect shot, but her perspective had shifted. She was no longer just capturing images. She was experiencing history, discipline, and human interaction all at once. Thompson's eyes scanned the crowd continuously, alert but calm. He had seen similar incidents countless times, yet each one was unique. Every tourist had their own energy, their own curiosity, and their own way of interacting with the palace and its traditions. It was his responsibility to manage these moments with patience and precision. The big elbow was not an act of aggression. It was an act of guidance, performed with skill and understanding. Emma, now more aware of the crowd's energy and the boundaries in place, took several more photos. Each click of her camera reminded her of the surreal encounter she had just experienced. She thought about how this would become one of the most memorable stories of her trip. The memory of being gently nudged by a king's guard, of standing so close to history that she could almost touch it, was something she knew she would tell her friends and family with a laugh and a sense of awe. She also reflected on the discipline required to be a part of the king's guard. It wasn't just about standing still or looking impressive. It was about responsibility, awareness, and the ability to act decisively and respectfully in any situation. Sergeant Thompson had demonstrated all of these qualities in a single, carefully calculated action. Emma realized that what might have seemed like a minor incident was, in fact, a powerful lesson in history, professionalism, and human interaction. As the ceremony continued, Emma took a deep breath and allowed herself to relax. She laughed quietly to herself, shaking her head at the absurdity and perfection of the moment. She had traveled thousands of miles to experience history, and yet it was the human interaction, the gentle guidance of a disciplined soldier, that had left the strongest impression. The big elbow had become a symbol of the day, an unexpected highlight of her visit, and a reminder that respect for rules and tradition could be communicated in ways far more memorable than words alone. By the time the ceremony concluded, Emma felt a sense of satisfaction and amusement. She had witnessed the precision of the king's guard, experienced their discipline firsthand, and captured photographs that would serve as reminders of her journey. But more than that, she had received a small, unforgettable lesson in awareness, respect, and the subtle ways history continues to interact with the present. She looked at Sergeant Thompson one last time. His posture remained perfect, his face unreadable and his presence commanding. For a brief moment, she felt a connection to him, not as a tourist and a soldier, but as two people sharing a small, unique moment in history. She smiled softly, realizing that this was exactly the kind of experience she had hoped for: memorable, educational, and deeply human. As she walked away, still carrying her camera, Emma replayed the incident in her mind. The big elbow had startled her initially, but now it made her laugh. It was a story she knew she would tell many times, embellishing only slightly for dramatic effect. She had come to Buckingham Palace expecting grandeur and history, and she had found all that, but also a moment of humor, discipline, and personal interaction that she would never forget. Emma took a few steps back, her heart still beating a little faster than usual. The big elbow from the King's Guard had been unexpected, but she quickly realized it wasn't painful, just firm enough to make her aware she had crossed a line. For a moment, she stood frozen, processing the surreal experience. Her camera, which had been her sole focus for the past several minutes, now hung loosely around her neck, forgotten. She couldn't help but glance at the soldier, Sergeant Thompson, who had returned to his unmovable, stoic position. His expressionless face gave nothing away, yet Emma could sense the disciplined alertness in his eyes. Around her, the crowd murmured softly, as if acknowledging the minor drama that had just unfolded. Some tourists exchanged amused glances, whispering to one another about what had just happened. Children giggled quietly, fascinated by the tall figure in the red uniform who had elbowed a tourist to maintain order. Emma felt a mix of embarrassment, awe, and amusement. She laughed quietly to herself, shaking her head. She had traveled thousands of miles to witness Buckingham Palace, expecting grandeur, history, and ceremony. But she had received something far more personal and memorable, a direct encounter with the King's Guard. She adjusted her scarf and brushed a strand of hair from her face, still smiling at the absurdity of the situation. Emma realized that this was a story she would tell for years, a humorous yet humbling reminder of the discipline and seriousness with which the guards carried out their duties. She could already imagine describing the scene to her friends back home, exaggerating the drama slightly for comedic effect. But deep down, she knew the reality had been even better, a genuine, perfectly executed demonstration of professionalism and tradition. Emma took a deep breath and looked around the courtyard. The guards continued their precise march, their boots clicking rhythmically against the stone floor. The band played on, filling the air with triumphant, lively music. Tourists raised their cameras again, capturing every step, every turn, every detail of the ceremonial display. Emma picked up her camera once more, determined to take a few more shots, but this time she remained fully aware of the boundaries. She wanted to preserve the memory, not create another incident. As she adjusted the lens, a small group of tourists nearby leaned toward her, whispering excitedly. "Did you see that?" one woman asked, pointing discreetly in her direction. The guard just elbowed her. Emma couldn't help but smile at their enthusiasm. She nodded, feeling a mix of pride and amusement. The situation, though slightly embarrassing, had quickly turned into a highlight of her trip. It wasn't every day that a tourist experienced such a direct interaction with history, even if it came in the form of a gentle but firm nudge. A few feet away, a tour guide noticed the subtle exchange and decided to explain to the group what had happened. "The guards are trained to maintain strict boundaries," he said, his voice calm but informative. "Sometimes they need to guide visitors back to the safe area. It's all part of their duty. Don't worry, they are highly professional and won't hurt anyone." It's just a gentle way to ensure everyone stays safe and the ceremony continues without interruption. Emma listened intently, nodding along. It made sense to her. The guards weren't being unkind or aggressive. They were preserving tradition and ensuring safety, two things she deeply respected. Emma's initial embarrassment began to fade, replaced by a sense of respect and admiration. She realized that the incident had taught her something valuable. Even in moments of excitement and curiosity, there were rules and boundaries to respect. History, tradition, and discipline were not just concepts to admire from a distance. They were living practices, maintained every day by people like Sergeant Thompson. She felt grateful for the lesson, even if it had come in such a surprising way. She turned her attention back to the ceremony. The guards continued their flawless march, their movements synchronized perfectly with the music. Emma's camera clicked softly as she captured the scene from a safe distance. Every photograph reminded her of the encounter, a gentle nudge in the right direction, both literally and metaphorically. She noticed small details she might have missed before: the way the lead guard's boot struck the ground, the crisp alignment of each soldier's posture, the subtle expressions that betrayed concentration and dedication. Each moment was a reminder that discipline, training, and tradition were inseparable from the pageantry she had come to see. Emma felt a sense of connection to history that she hadn't expected. The palace, the guards, the music, and even the crowd all came together to create an atmosphere that was both majestic and deeply human. She realized that the story of Buckingham Palace was not just about kings and queens. It was about people, discipline, and the care with which traditions were preserved. Sergeant Thompson's small, precise action had brought this lesson home in a way no photograph or guidebook ever could. A child nearby tugged at his mother's sleeve, asking why the guard had elbowed the tourist. The mother smiled and whispered, "It's just a way to make sure everyone stays safe and follows the rules." Emma chuckled softly. She understood completely now. The gentle correction wasn't punishment, it was guidance. It was a reminder that respect for rules and awareness of surroundings mattered, even in the midst of excitement. Emma lowered her camera for a moment and simply watched the ceremony unfold. She noticed the subtle coordination among the guards, the way they shifted in unison, their eyes constantly scanning the crowd, their posture unwavering despite hours of standing and marching. She felt a deep admiration for their dedication. Being a part of the audience was one thing, but understanding the responsibility and focus required to maintain this tradition added a new layer of appreciation. As the ceremony progressed, Emma began to reflect on her own actions. She realized that her eagerness to capture the perfect photo had blinded her to her surroundings. She had been so focused on her goal that she momentarily forgot about the people and rules around her. The incident with Sergeant Thompson reminded her that enthusiasm was wonderful, but awareness and respect were equally important. She felt a sense of humility, recognizing that even in the most exciting moments, she needed to remain mindful. Emma took another deep breath, feeling more composed and aware. She raised her camera one final time, carefully framing the guards and the band in her shot. The sunlight highlighted the gold accents on the soldiers' uniforms, the crisp lines of the palace, and the proud expressions of the tourists around her. She clicked the shutter, capturing not just an image, but a memory infused with humor, respect, and admiration. The big elbow had become a symbol of the day, a reminder that history and human interaction were intertwined in unexpected ways. Around her, the crowd began to shift as the ceremony neared its end. People clapped softly, whispered excitedly, and took a few final photographs. Emma joined in the applause, her smile genuine. She felt a sense of gratitude for the experience, the grandeur of Buckingham Palace, the precision of the guards, and the small, unforgettable lesson she had received. Sergeant Thompson, standing stoically in the distance, had reminded her that history was alive, maintained not just by stories or images, but by the careful actions and discipline of those entrusted with its preservation. As the crowd began to disperse, Emma lingered for a moment, taking in the final glimpses of the palace and its guards. She reflected on the incident once more, realizing that what had seemed embarrassing at first had transformed into a highlight of her trip. She had witnessed history, yes, but she had also experienced a moment of direct interaction, a subtle and meaningful connection with tradition. It was a memory she would carry with her for the rest of her life, a story to share with friends and family that was as entertaining as it was instructive. Emma packed her camera carefully, still smiling at the thought of the big elbow. She thought about how she would describe it later, exaggerating the humor slightly, but always remembering the respect and discipline that made the moment possible. She walked away from the railing, her steps light, her mind buzzing with excitement and reflection. The palace had given her more than she had expected, a lesson in history, human interaction, and the quiet power of discipline and tradition. After the ceremony ended, Emma lingered near the palace gates, unwilling to let go of the magical energy that still filled the courtyard. The tourists around her began to disperse, some chatting excitedly, others comparing photographs, and a few lingering just as she was, hoping to capture one last glimpse of the ceremonial guards. Emma took a deep breath, the spring air filling her lungs with a crisp freshness that made her feel completely alive. Her camera hung around her neck, now resting quietly, as if it too understood that the best moments could not always be captured through a lens. She walked slowly along the path, reflecting on everything that had happened. The grandeur of Buckingham Palace had been breathtaking, but it was the small, unexpected interaction with Sergeant Thompson that had truly left a mark. The big elbow, as she had already begun to jokingly call it in her mind, was more than just a gentle nudge. It was a lesson in discipline, respect, and awareness. It had reminded her that even in the midst of excitement, rules existed for a reason, and that sometimes the most memorable moments came from unexpected encounters rather than carefully staged photographs. Emma thought about the way the guard had acted, calm, composed, and perfectly measured. He had not shouted, scolded, or embarrassed her publicly. Instead, with a single, carefully executed gesture, he had guided her, corrected her, and ensured that the ceremony continued without interruption. She realized that his actions were a reflection of years of training, patience, and dedication. The King's Guard was not just a ceremonial role, it was a commitment to maintaining tradition, safety, and respect in a way that few people ever fully understood. As she continued walking, Emma passed a group of children who were laughing and pointing at the palace. One little boy tugged at his mother's hand, asking if the guards really elbowed people who got too close. Emma smiled and nodded discreetly, feeling a quiet sense of camaraderie with him. She wanted to tell him that the guard's action was not meant to be frightening or mean, but rather a gentle reminder that rules mattered. She realized that the incident had given her a unique perspective on history. It was not just about the past or the architecture, but also about the living people who maintained these traditions and interacted with visitors every day. Emma's thoughts drifted to her friends and family back home. She imagined telling them about her day, the excitement of arriving at Buckingham Palace, and the grandeur of the ceremony. And then, of course, she would describe the most memorable part, being gently nudged by a stoic King's Guard. She laughed softly at the thought. The story would be entertaining, certainly, but it would also carry a deeper message about awareness, respect, and the small ways in which history interacts with the present. She paused near a small garden adjacent to the palace, watching the sunlight glint off the blooms and the neatly trimmed hedges. Emma realized that the palace grounds themselves were as much a part of the experience as the guards or the ceremony. The careful maintenance, the attention to detail, and the sense of order mirrored the discipline she had just witnessed in Sergeant Thompson. Everything about the visit, from the architecture to the actions of the guards, conveyed a sense of history alive in the present moment. Emma reached into her bag and took out a small notebook she always carried while traveling. She wanted to capture her thoughts, not just with her camera, but with words. She began to write, describing the ceremony, the guards, and the crowd, but she saved the most space for the encounter with Sergeant Thompson. She wrote about the precise, gentle nudge, how it had startled her at first, and how it had transformed into admiration and amusement. She reflected on the lesson it had taught her. That respect for rules, awareness of surroundings, and appreciation for the dedication of others were all part of experiencing history fully. As she wrote, Emma noticed other tourists wandering nearby, some still taking photographs, others simply enjoying the atmosphere. She realized that everyone had their own story to tell about this place, just as she would. Some would focus on the grandeur of the palace, others on the precision of the ceremony, but her story would always include the small, personal moment of being corrected by the king's guard. That moment, brief as it was, had become the heart of her visit. Emma closed her notebook and looked around once more. The palace stood majestically, bathed in sunlight, flags fluttering gently atop its towers. The guards continued their routine duties, some marching off to their next post, others returning to stand stoically at the gates. Emma felt a sense of respect and gratitude for their dedication. They were not simply part of a ceremony. They were living symbols of tradition, history, and discipline. She thought about how easily she could have crossed the line without realizing it, and how Sergeant Thompson's intervention had turned a potential mistake into a meaningful, memorable experience. She decided to take one last photograph, not of the guards marching or the palace itself, but of the perspective she had from behind the railing, looking out at the grandeur of Buckingham Palace. The photo captured the sunlight, the crowd, and the sense of anticipation that filled the air. More importantly, it captured her perspective, informed and shaped by the encounter she had just experienced. She smiled as she lowered her camera, satisfied that the memory would remain vivid even without the photograph. As she walked away from the palace, Emma reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From her flights and planning to the excitement of the streets of London and the bustling crowds, every step had been leading to this moment. And while she had anticipated grandeur and history, she had not expected the personal, human connection she had experienced. The Big Elbow was more than just a funny incident. It was a symbol of respect, discipline, and the living presence of history in everyday life. Emma's thoughts drifted to the idea of storytelling. She realized that experiences like this were what made travel truly meaningful. It wasn't just about seeing landmarks or capturing perfect photographs. It was about being present, aware, and open to the unexpected. The small interactions, the moments of surprise, and the lessons learned along the way were what transformed a simple visit into a lasting memory. She knew she would retell this story countless times, each time emphasizing the humor, the lesson, and the uniqueness of the experience. She passed a small souvenir shop nearby and paused for a moment, considering buying a small memento of the day. Perhaps a miniature Buckingham Palace figurine or a postcard. But she realized that the most important souvenir was already with her, her memory, enriched by the unexpected encounter and the personal lesson she had received. The story of the gentle, Big Elbow would stay with her long after the trip ended, a reminder that history was not only something to observe, but something to experience and respect. As Emma made her way back to the bustling streets of London, she reflected on the sense of connection she felt, not only to the palace and the guards, but to the countless people who had come before her and would come after. Each visitor, each moment, added to the living history of the place. And in her own small way, she had become part of that story, a participant in the centuries-old tradition of Buckingham Palace. She thought again of Sergeant Thompson, standing stoically in his uniform, bearskin hat towering above him, eyes calm and unreadable. She realized that in those brief seconds of interaction, he had taught her more than any guidebook ever could. Discipline, professionalism, respect, awareness, and a sense of humor, all had been conveyed through a single, precise action. She smiled at the thought. Few people could claim to have learned so much in such a brief moment. By the time Emma reached the end of the palace grounds, the sun had shifted slightly, casting long, golden shadows across the courtyard. She took one last look behind her, feeling a sense of completion. The palace, the guards, and the crowd all seemed to exist in perfect harmony. She knew she would carry the memory with her forever. The big elbow was no longer just an amusing anecdote. It was a symbol of her journey, her awareness, and her connection to history. Emma walked away with a spring in her step, her heart full of gratitude, excitement, and reflection. She thought about how she would recount the story later, emphasizing both the humor and the lesson it had taught her. She realized that travel was not just about seeing new places. It was about experiencing life in unexpected ways, learning from encounters and carrying those lessons forward. And today, at Buckingham Palace, she had learned a lesson she would never forget. As the streets of London enveloped her once again, Emma felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. She had witnessed history, experienced the discipline of the King's Guard firsthand, and come away with a story that was uniquely hers. She smiled, knowing that the memory of the gentle nudge, the big elbow, and the stoic presence of Sergeant Thompson would remain vivid, a highlight of her journey, and a story she would tell for the rest of her life.